Okay, Dan, go for it, man.
Ready whenever you are.
Okay, so a few housekeeping items for everyone here. You are muted, but you definitely please feel free to field questions throughout the presentation. We will answer them. I'll try to answer as many as I can as well. Dan is going to be doing most of the talking. For those who are worried, if you want to take a screenshot, don't worry about it. If you've registered for the webinar, you're going to get a recording of the webinar, and that link will be sent to you once the webinar is done. So I think just sit back, enjoy, and ask the questions you want to ask. So I'm James Norris, and I'm the Vice President of ClearEdge 3D for industry strategy specifically. My background I started off in surveying, moved into scanning and scheduling, and then ran our BDC department at the Beck Group.
Yep, and my name is Dana. I'm a sales manager for ClearEdge 3D on the hardware side. And everyone, thanks again for joining us. Today we'll be going through some workflows that are just going to help you lay out your points faster when it comes to project field layout. It's going to help you speed up your installation and just make the whole process from office to field a more smooth transition. During this presentation, I ask that you keep in mind that we're going to be using Topcon's tools for this workflow, as that's what ClearEdge 3D is kind of most familiar with. However, these processes will work with any comparable products from other companies, so it's by no means like Topcon specific. So here's a picture of Doc holding up his plans for a Flux capacitor from a movie just a little bit before my time, right? So the reason that we use this analogy is because companies will oftentimes use AutoCAD or Revit to create their drawings. They'll go and store it on the cloud, all to go and then print off a PDF for guys in the field. After that, they'll typically pull out a tape measure, and that's when things can get real messy real quick. So they're using all these modern tools only to go back in time and reference a piece of paper and lay out with a tape measure. So, during this webinar, our intention is that you might leave with some additional knowledge that's going to help you move forward into the digital age rather than kind of go back in time and use a tape measure and a PDF. So let's kind of go ahead and jump on into it. I just want to start with this picture. It's a great picture of what we're all trying to avoid. So we spend all this time coordinating, and then as soon as we pull out a tape measure, it all goes out the window. And this picture has a pretty funny story. So I was on a plane a while back when I got chatting with this guy next to me, pre-COVID times, and he asked what I did. So I gave him my quick elevator pitch on Robotic Total Station. Well, it turns out this guy was actually a pool contractor and says, "Look what I'm dealing with. I just had to cut my vacation short because of this picture that one of my techs sent me." And so he pulls out this photo. Well, in this case, the wall and the MEP contractor could both be right, but if neither has a deviation report, they're just going to end up blaming each other. So, unfortunately, if you're not using a robotic total station, you don't always have the proof to back up your work to the GC. But when you are using a robotic total station, the proof is in the as-built and the deviation report that the tool creates.
Yeah, I think when we think about the steps for layout, generally it's you get design drawings and some form of documents, and then you have to consume that information and then create the points to build your building, and you place those points, and then you as-built those points. Really quickly, these circles, they kind of represent the frequency of that work getting done. Collecting information many times happens at the beginning of the job and a little bit throughout the project, but point creation and point placement, basic layout happens every day. And then as-built is the next highly frequent item. And so the question is, we need to look at what we can control, which are these top three things, and design is just something where we get from someone else. Next slide. And I think what we're going to focus on, right, is how can we have a simple, seamless workflow to reduce our risk for these highly frequent items, and also to kind of protect ourselves and protect our clients. Many times the workflows are very departed or fragmented from each other, and we're going to talk a little bit more today about how that can become more seamless. And then really at the end, talk about stepping it up a notch as well with some of ClearEdge's products. So if this is, the traditional tape measure, this is how we do it. Look how many people are required, right? So jobs already face resource problems, and we need to automate. So Topcon, they've done a great job to focus on a new tool called Point Manager that automatically does point creation in a very smart way, pushes that to the cloud, and then you can just perform layout in the field literally like 5 times faster and guide yourself to where you're going. And then passively, it's collecting that as-built information, and then you can push that as-built information back to, through the cloud and back to the desktop. So if there's someone who's doing point creation in your office, or it can be you can always have that data automated or updated to kind of understand if there is an issue. And then again, if you really want to take that even farther, you can use tools like Verity or Rithm to really step up the level of accountability on your job. So that's that.
Cool. And then so prepping for layout, guys, sometimes just the, saying these words can make some people cringe because, they think it's going to be a very long and tedious process. But what I'm going to show you are some of the tools that we can use to take some of that pain away when it comes to prepping for layout. So the first step in the workflow is prepping your data for layout using Topcon's Point Manager plugin for AutoCAD or Revit. So Topcon Point Manager is used to format point data for your layout device, where Magnet Field on the right there is the application that's used to actually lay out your points. In Magnet Layout, you can also create points. You can view your plans in 2D or 3D, and then run several reports, including a deviation report. So after you're done prepping your data with Topcon's Point Manager, you're going to send it over to Magnet Layout. And just a little bit more on Point Manager, because it's a very important step in the process. How we build hasn't really changed much, but the tools available to help us get the project done quicker, certainly have. So Point Manager is really the most efficient way to export point files and background drawings to your layout device. And as you guys all know, not all field workers have the same experience and abilities at reading these construction plans. So it's always very beneficial to simplify the information that we're sending out to the field. And as mentioned, Point Manager is a plugin. It works for either AutoCAD or Revit. And here's kind of how it works, right? So for example, in Point Manager, you would pick maybe a sleeve in the drawing, and then whatever symbol that you used in the drawing for sleeves, the program's going to recognize that and say, okay, where do you want me to create a point on this sleeve? You're going to say something like, well, the center of the sleeve. It's then going to run through the project and pull out all of those sleeves. Now you can do the same thing for anything, for example, hangers. All you're doing is you're identifying objects in that drawing, you say go, and then it automatically pulls out all those points. And now you have your drawing and all of your points, which you're gonna then upload into the controller or the data collector, which then runs on Magnet Layout. And I just went over some of the kind of the benefits of Point Manager. But the whole goal is to remove as much pain and include as much automation as we can. So using Point Manager, you're going to be able to do a few things. The first of which is you're going to be able to reduce the time and the cost of your construction layout. The second of which is you're going to avoid any construction errors and rework. It really just improves field productivity and simplifies the whole BIM to field process. After you're done with Point Manager and you got all your points out of there, the next step is to send the points to the field so you can start laying out. There's a couple ways of doing that. You can either manually upload those points to your layout instrument or the data collector, or you can take advantage of Magnet Enterprise's cloud transfer. So there's a few different ways of getting that information over there. The easiest tends to be the cloud transfer.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note is just best practice, no matter the software you're using, is you really want to do as good of a job as you can with classifying what your points are, both for yourself and for your adjacent work and users. So if you're sharing a project, a magnet field project with other subcontractors, and you're doing MEP work, you're thinking about placing hangers, et cetera, by classifying these things, not only do you know what they are, but then next slide, you can filter and look at this data on your field collector, and within magnet field, then you can color code and then turn layers on and off. So you're just focusing on what you're doing for that day. That is, again, best practice in general, but obviously that capability does exist within the integration between Point Manager and then into magnet layout. So next slide. I think another really important thing to think about is that you don't need to dimension your drawings. Now, a lot of people will smirk, including myself. Like, I worked out in the field, and yes, depending on who's consuming the data, they will need dimensions. But if you have a robotic total station and that user has a field controller, you just export your points out of Point Manager, because they're referencing from those digital documents, whether it's like a Revit model or from AutoCAD or a DXF file that's being consumed. So you have to think, a lot about where is your time being spent, because jobs, profit margins are already low, right? And the speed of jobs has just exponentially grown. So we have to really think about where our time is being spent. A really great part, right, with Point Manager is you just don't need to do those dimensioning. And if you want, you can always pull dimensions within your field controller. So.
Yep, and thanks for that, James. Essentially, when you compare all these point creation softwares that are out there, Point Manager, it typically gives you the most bang for your buck. So it's really the most cost-efficient software that's currently on the market. And while it is geared towards brand new users, you can make this as simple or as robust as you need it to be. On top of that, all of the GTV kits that are provided by TopCon include Point Manager. So you're not going to have to worry about buying a license on top of the instrument to accomplish this workflow. And so we kind of gone over Point Manager. Let's talk about laying out and then some of the robots and instruments that are used to do that. So far we've gone over how to use Point Manager and then export those point files and background drawings to your layout device. Now I'm going to cover how we can set up anywhere, and you can actually start laying out those points. So I'm going to run you through setting up anywhere step by step, just to show you guys how easy it is. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to pick a place on the job site with a decent vantage point for what we want to lay out. The second point is taking that pull prism, and that can be to a second point, and that can be your edge of slab, a column intersection, doesn't matter, and you're going to shoot that point. The third step is just you're going to repeat what you just did. So when you shoot that second point, what it's going to do is back calculate its position, and now the instrument knows exactly where it's at on that job site. Furthermore, the instrument's going to tell you if you're accurate and say, okay, based off of those 2 points, everything you shoot will be within 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, etc. Finally, you're going to pick a point to lay out, and the instrument is going to tell you to move in that direction. When you're close enough, you're going to mark it, and you're going to shoot that point. What that's going to do is it's going to store the position as being shot and automatically create an as-built in the background. So you just do the same thing for the rest of your points. It's really that easy to go from your drawing in AutoCAD or Revit to Point Manager to laying out your points in the field. Now let's talk about some of the instruments that are actually used to layout. In this case, again, just because ClearEdge 3D is a little bit more familiar with TopCon tools, they're going to be TopCon tools that I'm talking about. With both of these instruments that you're looking at on the screen, layout is significantly faster with just one guy and a robotic total station. versus your standard layout crew, so like 3 people and a tape measure. What this is going to do for you is it's going to reduce the human error. It's going to help all these installers by laying out ahead of time, which obviously in turn speeds up your installation. And you're going to, people typically see layout cost reduced by about 50% with the labor and the time savings that are incurred. As I mentioned, it also runs like an as-built in the background and provides a deviation report. So that's also especially useful just to back up your work in the end. And the 2 instruments that you're looking at, the instrument on the left is the GTV series, and then the one on the right is the LN150. You might hear me refer to them as like the big brother for the GT and the little brother for the LN. Just tends to kind of roll off the tongue a bit smoother than GT 500V and LN150, right? Something else to note about these instruments is that the device in the middle is the data collector. And it works with both of the instruments. So if you have a mixed fleet, let's say you might have a big brother and a little brother at your disposal, you're not going to have to worry about switching devices all the time. The data collector in the middle is also what magnet field layout runs on. So let's talk about the GTV series first. The V stands for vertical. So this instrument is purpose-built for the MEP space. It does feature an ultrasonic motor, which allows the instrument to turn at 150 degrees a second. Just like an electric toothbrush, there's no moving parts. So there's going to be instances where the points are right next to the instrument. And you can just imagine how fast this instrument needs to move when you're maybe 10, 15, 20 feet away from it. With this instrument, you're never going to have to wait for it to catch up to you as you're laying out your points. It also features a laser deployment, so you can set up over a known point if you're not going to set up anywhere, which is the process that we just went over, and the dog whistle. So the dog whistle is that instrument in the top right-hand corner. This provides the fastest prism reacquisition that's currently available on the market. So often your line of sight is going to be obstructed on the job site. It's going to force you to reconnect. You might have someone walk in front of you, or you might walk behind a column. And the dog whistle allows you to reconnect with just a click of a button. You also won't be messing around with radio and radio channels. So the GTV uses a Bluetooth connection, which is like very similar to jumping in your car and having the music pair automatically. You just turn it on and it's automatically connected. So to summarize, I mean, the GTV is great for larger projects where the speed and range of the instrument is needed.
Yeah, one thing to say really on the GT series, especially with that RC unit, which is the dog whistle, is when you think about doing layout and you think about doing like pre-pour. So if concrete, by the time we're placing sleeves or rebar or edge forms, concrete's coming in just a couple of hours. And at least in my experience, every time the total station dropped, the prism pull, I mean, it just stacks up against you, and people are yelling, get off the deck, and it's hot, and you're just like, oh, this is terrible. And I think it should be very much appreciated to have something that can maintain. It's simple and elegant, right? It's not that it's just that it works. I think definitely something to take note of when you're thinking about production and how many points you're going to place, and kind of how to keep your people, efficient, safe, and also have the ability to get off the deck as fast as possible. So, anyways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the little brother, I'd kind of be doing everyone a disservice if I didn't speak about it. It's also a fully robotic total station. It has about 430 feet of range. All I'm trying to say here is it's a little bit limited in its vertical scope and range, but it does have an extremely low entry cost. So a lot of companies will start off with an LN150, realize that they might need something a little bit bigger and faster for the larger projects they're working on, and then they'll throw a GT or a big brother in there as well. So the LN150 is really good for smaller projects like the multi-residential or strip malls, where you're not going to be shooting from very far away. But again, both fully robotic total stations. And yeah, it's a great instrument for kind of having a mixed fleet for different types of projects. And I'll pass it over to James to kind of speak about the as-builds.
Yeah, so we can just move right on to the next slide to talk about what these, what these are. So well, let me actually move one more slide. Frankly, we'll just move on. So a big thing, right, is that we spend all of this money and time um, designing our buildings in 3D or even in 2D and CAD. Then we do 3D coordination or just basic coordination before your job starts, right? You're redlining drawings and you spend all this money and management time to ensure that the building will be built properly before the shovel hits the dirt. But even with the best of intentions, that just does not occur. I mean, people, there's human error involved and things get placed in the wrong location. So I think what's very important is to have the proper tools to kind of protect the user from placing things in the wrong location, or to at least let them know in a proactive way what's wrong. And if something has been installed inappropriately, that they have a way of holding themselves or someone else accountable, because what you don't want to face is not knowing why something's wrong. Then there's a change order. And if you're a sub, like you'll end up paying for that problem. Or if you're a surveyor, same thing, like you can be held accountable. There's insurance, there's all these things that play into our businesses. And, we're trying to, erode as much of that profit burn as we possibly can. And that can only really occur by having accountability. So next slide. A really nice, feature that's just simple, right, is every time you're shooting in points that you're going to place, it's automatically taking that point, and you at least have the documentation to say, hey, I put this hanger here, it's time stamped, whatever. If I placed the outline for this steel column here, and if it gets placed wrong, you at least have documentation to go back to and say, hey, this is what happened when. And that's also very good, best practice if there's an RFI. It's a good way to defend yourself, or to at least know what's going on in your job. Now, if you want to step it up a notch, we can, next slide, really think about this conversation we had about, the millions of dollars that are invested for modeling and 3D coordination, just for things, again, to be installed wrong. And it's frustrating. I mean, I can't imagine the amount of times I've heard, well, what's the ROI on your modeling efforts or your 3D coordination efforts? It's very hard to defend that when work is getting installed inappropriately on the job. And the thing is, no one's trying to do their job the wrong way. It just, things happen. So that the question is, how can we protect them and ourselves from those things occurring? And that's where I think the next slide comes in, that we have with ClearEdge, right? We created a tool called Verity, and effectively, if you power it, if you tie this to a new robot, the GTL. So the GTL is a GT series robotic total station with a laser scanner on top of it. And it's a 360 laser scanner. It's not just scanning a small area. It can do a full dome scanner. You can focus it in on a certain area that you want. And we have tuned our software to work with the scanner, which is awesome. We've tuned it actually with all of our different products. And the data is extremely clean, which is important. It's not noisy, which matters a lot for those who do scanning and know about that. And you can kind of see here that we have this as design location, and then where it actually was placed was in a totally different location, right? And the benefit is, if you know this, next slide, you can publish that information to Procore or to Autodesk 360, or just print out PDFs. I think what's critical is that if we think about our existing workflows, what do we do now? Well, what we do now is we own a robotic total station, right? And then we have a laser scanner. And if you think about a person working on like a high rise, well, as a high rise is getting built, that person has to carry all of that equipment up and down, right? Or leave it in their lockbox or their Joe box. But there's still a lot of carrying of things, right? So there's that. There's, the decks are always moving. Someone knocks over your instrument and you're hosed. And you're also having to learn how to use two separate instruments. And I can't, going back, thinking about the training and the support involved on expecting someone to be an expert at both using a total station and being an expert at scanning, with separate instruments is it's exponentially harder. It's not that it's not possible, but it takes a special kind of person. And when we think about building construction, whether it's horizontal or vertical construction markets, resources are slim and or scarce, and finding those kinds of people is even more scarce. So when you're trying to think about how can we lose less money in our job, we're going to do this thing with another scanner. It's like, well, a lot of things then have to be true on your project, right? You have to have the right person. You have to have enough money to cover both instruments, maintenance agreements, et cetera. It just keeps growing. And what we want to do is try to kind of consolidate that into one instrument where it's like, I just need to learn one thing. And the really cool thing is when you're set up with the robotic total station and you scan, your scan data is then on control. So there's no manual alignment to like move that scan data, which is very dangerous, or then you have to, through the registration process and software, have to get it onto control. It's just done passively. And for those who are in the office, it will matter a lot to them to know that, right? Because we don't need to be spending hours and hours validating his work being put in place, especially if you're doing pre-pour scan validation. Because if it takes me 5 hours, which is kind of the typical process right now, the fastest way to do it, concrete may already be poured, and it's too late. We want to be able to know in real time or near real time what's going on our projects. Next slide. And this is a really good example, right? So we can imagine these are actual jobs where we've used the GTL, we've captured scan data, and it's like, all right, that column on the far right is in the wrong place. I think another really important thing to note is that you can change the parameters of what's considered installed correctly or incorrectly. Because, right, the tolerances for steel are different than the tolerances for maybe ductwork, right? You may not care. I mean, duct still matters because it takes up a lot of plenum space, but maybe you say, if it's off by a 1/2 inch, I'm concerned, where with a steel column, it may be like 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch, depending on, what's getting connected to it. And these are just really good ways to know what's going on in the project. And then again, this data gets published directly to Procore or to 360 Field from Autodesk, or you can just export out an HTML file to send to anybody, or now PDFs, which matters a lot, right? And I was we implemented this on a job years ago, and I think we went from, by having these inspections, we went from an average of like 600 errors down to like 67 or something on the next dorm of the same kind of project. And I think what that means is that when you have real time or you have visual accountability, you can really hone in on the problems of your job, and then that allows you to do your lean planning and scheduling and not have, mess ups that really blow your schedule up, or this process you're trying to implement. Next slide. At the same time, we also have Rithm, and we've been working a lot on optimizing that to, especially this past year. And I think when we think about repetitive work, right, we were talking about how do we reduce the amount of resource load for different types of tasks. So as building is one of them. Well, Rithm and floor flatness analysis is another. When I was working, we had to walk every 5 feet on a deck for a high rise, for instance, to do a grid of points and say we're not concerned about this floor, it's flat enough, right? It matters even more with a parking deck about what your slopes are. You don't want ponding on your jobs, for instance. And then if you go to data centers or arenas or places that require super flat floors, you have the ability to run an ASTM 1155 report within the software. So you kind of can use 2 birds for 1 stone. You can use Rithm for these very high profile jobs that require super flat floors. It also works, you can run it if you're using a GLS, you can hit wet concrete and run this while concrete's getting poured, or you can just use it basically as a floor flatness kind of generic tool on a general like high-rise project, or when you're or anywhere you have to check floor flatness. And I think, next slide, what that leads us to is that, you know, we're trying to identify these panes, and these panes that have the highest frequency of occurring. So if we can automate point creation, that's step one, right, in the office. And then step two, we can place those points and we can be confident where they're going and be productive with that. And step three is we can really ramp up and amp up the verification process, so we can protect our profits and know what is good or bad about our jobs. And I think that's really been where we're honing in between TopCon and ClearEdge, is keeping that as simple and as elegant as we possibly can. And that's really it. So I think now it's really, if there's additional questions that anybody has, we're absolutely willing to take any of those right now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we went, I think we thought this was going to last a little bit longer, but I guess, you know, being short is better than being over for your guys' time's sake. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat box and we'll get right back to you.
We have answered a couple. Will this work with the TopCon? So David, yes, it will work with the GLS 2000. Yes, absolutely. If that means Verity and Rithm and Edgewise, yes. Same goes to the GTL. So. Well, all right. Well, I think, you know, the best part of, I would say, a good presentation, if we're not trying to waste time, we don't have to spend time and kind of allow everybody to get back to their kind of normal working schedule. You know, if you have additional questions, you know, please reach out to either one of us, or also, you know, if you're, or marketing, I think at the end, there's actually a link for any additional questions you want, and we can meet with you and talk about whatever you'd like, whether it's hardware or software related, and kind of point you in the right direction. So, okay. Well, I think last slide. Keep going, so we can let people see the. Yeah. So marketing at clearedge3d.com, and we really appreciate everyone being here. Again, you will get this webinar or a link to it in this recording once the webinar is completed. So don't worry about that. And other than this, you know, thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for joining.
Take care, everybody. Bye.